and well met. I am your humble narrator, here to entertain, amuse, and perhaps even educate. And in return, all I ask is that you stay a while and listen. So, with it being the 23rd of December, I have decided that it is time to regale you with the tale of probably the best Christmas themed role playing session I ever took part in. It was 1997, and a friend of mine, Eric, who sadly passed away a few years ago, had decided he was going to run something extra special. He was going to run the game of games. He was going to run the kind of game that legends are made of. And boy, did he come close. So, to start this story, I have to explain that it was set in a universe that I've been working on and off for the last 20 years. I call it Immortal Empires, and it basically is a universe where belief is a force of nature. Belief is as powerful as gravity, essentially. And the concept is, if you get enough people to believe something, it becomes real. So if you wanted, and you could get enough people together, you could get them and make them believe that a mountain is like a foot to the left. The mountain will be a foot to the left. So you can imagine it's a game world rife with potential for abuse. And he had asked me, could he set this game in this universe? And I thought, yeah, why not? It's a universe that's based on alternative human history, and it's a bit different. It's a bit fun. It's something I've really enjoyed working on over the years. And I thought, yeah, fuck it, why not? Eric, tear away, have fun. Boy, did he have fun. He went away, and about 2 weeks later, he said, okay, gang, and there was like 5 of us. Everyone up for playing a pre-made character one-off adventure on the 23rd. And without any hesitation, we all went, yes. God's yes, get us away from our families for a couple of hours. It was awesome. So we all show up at his place, and fun begins. So we all sit down, and he hands us out these character sheets. And the first thing we notice is that all the characters are elves, but there's 2 different types of elves. There's high elves and snow elves. Okay. High elves are based essentially on the Shining Ones in Irish mythology, on Tuatha De Danann, Children of Dana. And I think those are the Shining Ones. Oh, I really forget things so easily, especially when I have a migraine, which I do. So essentially high elves are, think of them as Tolkien's elves. They're really tall, they're slender, they have amazing dexterity, and an incredible sense of where their body is and what their body is doing and where they belong and who they are and yada yada yada. You get where I'm going with this. The snow elves, on the other hand, are what we would now think of as Santa's elves. They're like that height, and while they are very dexterous, they have basically no strength. I think none of them had a strength higher than 3, which is ridiculous, because he was running a bastardized version of the D20 system, or something similar to the D20 system. I'm not sure if D20 was out in 98, but it was definitely something based on a D20 system, which means it could be GURPS as well. And so your maximum strength was 20. 20 was godlike strength. And the Snow Elves had 3. And they were incredibly dexterous, and there was a significant difference between the 2. The High Elves are just elves. They're very quick. They can blend into the scenery very easily. They're good with bows. They're good with short swords. They're basically minor deities, minus the significant deific powers. These were basically just souped up humans that were, that's it. The Snow Elves, on the other hand, were something more interesting. The Snow Elves, if you gave them enough of the raw materials, say you gave them some wood and some raw, unprocessed iron ore. If you had 3 of them together, concentrating on it, they could basically pray that material into the form of a hammer. I think he said it was like 1d4 hours to turn raw wood, iron ore into a hammer. Now, the more complex the item, the longer it takes to make. So, say the example he gave was like a Pentium PC. If you gave them everything they needed to pray into existence a Pentium PC, they could do it. But 3 snow elves would take, I think he said something like 200 D20 hours. So, you know, it's kind of crazy that way. And the way he had worked it out was the length was affected by your faith skill. Well, a combination of your faith and intelligence. It was really weird, but it was really interesting and really fun. So what was the story? Right. So 2 days before the story begins, before our adventure begins, a druid goes searching for his son. His son has vanished along with his 2 hunting dogs. He has no idea where they are, and he has spent hours and hours looking for them. There's a blizzard. This is somewhere in Central Europe. It's the middle of winter, and after an exhausting search, when he himself is on the verge of collapse, he finds his son between the dead bodies of his 2 hunting dogs. The 2 dogs have literally given up their bodies and their body heat and their lives to keep his son alive. So this druid is now consumed by a sense of relief and astonishment and awe at the generosity of these 2 dogs that they sacrificed themselves to protect this human child. So this human child is 2 years old. And the following day, after he leaves his son with this druid, by the way, I should point out, as a widow, and he leaves the son with basically his dead wife's sister and goes out to repay this generosity. Somewhere along the way, he finds trapped in a ice crystal a wisp. Tiny little ball of light spirit. And the wisp inside in this piece of ice is aware of what's going on around it, even though it can't escape. And it's looking at the druid and knowing its life is at an end, because druids use wisps in their devotions to their gods and yada yada yada. Druids weren't necessarily nice people. They were big into blood sacrifice and things like that for a reason, for much the same reason that most early cultures were based to some degree on sacrifice. So our druid finds the wisp in the ice crystal, takes his blade to it and shatters the crystal, releasing the wisp. He bows to the wisp, backs away from it, turns around and walks away. So he has passed on. Basically, it's paying it forward. He pays forward his dog's loyalty and generosity by saving something else, with the hope that that something else will do the same, and so on and so on and so on. And the wisp is overwhelmed by this. Now, one of the things that Eric had decided, and I've agreed with him actually, and I've carried it through myself in my later stories that were based in this universe, that wisps are highly intelligent. They're not quite genius level, but they're damn close. They would be like IQ 140, 150, which is ridiculously high. And they have a very strong sense of empathy and a very strong sense of emotion. Now, it's not necessarily positive or beneficial towards humanity, but they have it. So again, this wisp is, just like the druid the day before, consumed with the sheer generosity of this druid's act. And that's the birth of Santa Claus. Santa Claus in this universe is a wisp. It's a wisp that now embodies a spirit of generosity. And over the intervening centuries, it makes the purpose of its existence to engender a sense of profound generosity in other creatures. Typically on the day on which it was rescued, which is the 25th. And before you start going on about Yule and Christ and the whole lot, it's pretty much certain that if there even was a Christ, he was not born in December. Okay? Just trust me on this. The history says that, yeah, there was a census in that time period, but it wasn't in December. So we'll leave all the Christian stuff to one side. So centuries go by, the druid is dead, his sons are dead, time has passed on, but Santa has gathered around him helpers, the high elves and the snow elves. And the high elves help because they've been largely displaced by subsequent belief systems. The snow elves were never a part of a belief system. They were just teeny tiny elves that got on with their own thing. But he's gathered together this group And their purpose is to help him spread this sense of generosity by doing small things that are impossible to explain. Like, it's the source of the myth of you leave a bowl, I think it's a bowl of milk in your shoes will be mended by elves. Similar to that. It's a long time ago since this game. And yeah, Eric explained a lot of it to me, but it was really complicated and it was a really long time ago. Anyway, after years and years and years of being this spirit of generosity with his little army of high and snow elves helping as well, we get to the adventure. Santa has vanished! The spirit of generosity has vanished, and the spirit of generosity is waning in the world because a lot of it came from this particular wisp's belief, core, unbreakable, iron hard belief in generosity. And he's vanished. And the elves, of course, snow and high, they have their own council, and the elders on the council choose 5 elves to go out into the world and rescue him. But first, they must find an oracle. So if you don't know your mythology very well, an oracle is basically kind of a soothsayer. They're not necessarily able to predict the future, but they might be able to tell you what is happening in real time somewhere far away. And that's very much the way they are in this particular gaming universe. They're primarily not about the future. They're primarily more about what's happening in the here and now. And the elves are sent forth. So we had 3 high elves, 2 snow elves. I don't even remember the names of any of them. They were just the elves. And the high elves basically travelled with the snow elves either running alongside them or riding in their backpacks. It's this symbiotic relationship that's developed over the centuries. And it's not uncommon for a high elf and a snow elf to form a kind of a familial bond where they will spend their lifetimes with one another, supporting one another and helping one another in their goals. It kind of makes sense. So they go forth, and there's this 1 hour of the session is literally them traveling from somewhere in the Baltic states to the only oracle that's remaining in the world at this point in time. This point in time in this universe is about the 16th century, equivalent of our 16th century, minus a lot of the tech. Their tech hasn't developed quite as quickly. So you're still talking about medieval Europe, essentially. And the first hour is all about them traveling along. And one of the things that we, the players, had agreed was, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this properly. I mean, we were lucky. We were given an hour to kind of discuss how we wanted to play this and where we wanted it to go and what have you. And we had decided that elves, in the mythological sense, tend to be creatures that are they're shy. They vanish quickly. They are difficult to see, find, and almost impossible to catch. So we had decided we were going to stealth our way across Europe. And Fairfox Derek, he let us. And we got away with it. We really did. It was fantastic. I mean, we had one random encounter, and I think it was with wolves. And we managed to get out of it without killing any of the wolves. We literally scared the wolves away. The snow elves basically used their ability to pray and believe things to be what they potentially can be, to turn just the snow everywhere into this flurry of snowballs that fired at the wolves from everywhere, and the wolves scattered in fear, and that was it. And it was it was really good fun. It was, all 3, and we all had to pass faith and intelligence checks, and Eric, being who he was, went, okay, it takes you X number of minutes to create this belief spell that will allow the snow in the surrounding area to gather itself together into balls and fling themselves at the wolves. And because of that, it ended up with the 2 elves. It was 2 snow elves and 3 high elves. And the 2 snow elves were literally carried by 1 high elf while running. And they were held like this. And they were doing this prayer, and we continuously had, I was playing one of the snow elves, and we continuously had to do concentration checks because we were being run. We were running through a forest and we were being jerked a little bit and jarred a little bit. It was awesome. I mean, it's very rare in a role-playing game you have a situation where it's a combat situation and you're trying to use a non-combat way to get through it, and we did. And you know, he had this beautiful description of the wolves they're right on your tail. Well, all of a sudden there's this kind of tinkling noise in the atmosphere, and as one, the three high elves come to a stop and turn to face the wolves. At that moment, dozens of snowballs start flying out of the woods around them, hitting the wolves in the face, in the body, just scaring the crap out of the wolves. And the wolves, first of all, they crouch down, they back away, and then they turn tail and run in fear from what they cannot understand. It was amazing. But it was only the beginning of the adventure. So we travel across Europe and we get to Delphi, to the Oracle at Delphi. And in this game world, all gods that have ever been worshipped exist. Why are my glasses so crooked? Every god that has ever been worshipped exists. Gods don't die. They diminish as they lose followers, or they rise up as they gain followers. And the Greek gods, because in this universe the Roman Empire hasn't fallen, the Greek gods by Roman names are still largely believed in. So they're still quite powerful, and while they don't interfere in the human world the same way that they used to in like mythological Greek time, things like Alexander the Great, the eagle that flies over the Battle of Gaugamela is actually Zeus. You know, things like that. They don't interfere in that way anymore, but they're still a powerful force in the world. So we go there, and at this point, it's important to freaking glasses. It's important to realize that the high elves are, all elves are kind of priests in a weird way. They're not exactly priests, but they're kind of priests, and they all have the ability in specific areas to commune very directly with the gods or with supernatural beings in general. And the Oracle at Delphi is one of those places. There's fumes come up from a crack that allow them to reach an altered state of consciousness, which lets them go into direct contact with the gods. Now, the gods of the Greek pantheon largely approve of Santa and what the Wisp has become, because this Wisp is the first of his kind to become more than what he is by his nature. And there's this one of them, the high elf player that had the highest faith basically communed, and Eric takes on the persona of Apollo, and there's this whole conversation which is in rhyme. I'm not joking. The whole conversation between Apollo and this high elf was completely in rhyme. The player, I think his name is Andrew. Yeah, Andrew. Basically, Andrew and Eric, they would, every second sentence, were speaking to each other, and they were doing their best to rhyme with each other, and it just happened randomly. It was one of those weird things that just happened, and it just kept going. And it's like Apollo said something like, "Who are you that calls to me in communion?" And Andrew goes, "We are the high elves of Santa who follow him and now wish to speak with you in union." And it was just weird. It was like, you could see his brain go click. Oh my, I just rhymed and I didn't mean it. And he was rather drunk at this stage. I'm not even sure he knew what he was saying, to be quite honest. But we're sitting there watching these two players go, basically rhyming off each other and riffing off of each other. And it goes on for a good 10 minutes. And by the end of it, we find out that Persephone, goddess of the spring, has kidnapped Santa Claus. Well, Santa, not Santa Claus. And the reason being, she's hoping to use his capability for generosity to convince Hades to release her eternally, so that Earth will no longer experience winter. And this is important because in this world, Boreas, I think he's the god of the west wind, but he's also the god of winter, basically is every year since the existence of Santa has basically required Santa to ask him to relinquish control over the season so that Persephone can take over, because Boreas he's an angry god. And this is actually the mythology. He's a very, very angry, very violent god. And those that believe him have been reduced massively in number and massively in influence. And he's angry about that. So his way of maintaining some significant degree of power is through the belief and the understanding and acceptance of his existence by Santa, the High Elves, and the Snow Elves, along with whatever humans still believe in him. This is bad news. No Santa, which means no one to intercede on behalf of humanity in Europe and in the Northern Hemisphere so that we get spring. This is bad news. So at this point, we take a break, and Eric goes off and he wants to work on a few new notes. He's had ideas while we've been playing, and we're sitting around trying to figure out how are we going to do this. Yeah, we now realize we're going to have to go to Hades. We're actually going to have to go to the realm of death. Egads, that was a big ask, freaking big ask. So we're sitting around, we're going, okay, what do we need to be able to do this? Now, I don't know if you know about this, but there's a place in Turkey that was called the Doorway to Hell. And it's actually, I think it's a cave system. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. Eric looked this up, I didn't, and I'm trying to remember. But as far as I can remember, it's basically a sealed off cave that seeps out poisonous gases. Basically, essentially, it's not just a cave to hell, it's actually a cave of death. Maybe somebody else knows what it is and they can put it in the comments, but essentially it's a doorway into a cave system that are poisonous. And we're all looking at each other, and Eric has given us a handful of notes of things that our characters would know about the world. And this is one of the things they would know, that there is this doorway to hell, or Hades. Because the kingdom of Hades includes Elysium and it includes Tartarus. Tartarus is hell, Greek hell. Elysium is basically wheat fields and happiness. The description that Gandalf gives in The Return of the King at the end of the Battle of Minas Tirith, when he's talking about into a swift sunrise, that's basically Elysium. And we would know, the elves would know of the existence of this actual doorway to this realm in the human world, in the physical plane, and that it's basically the way it's created is it stops humans from entering it. But elves aren't humans, and elves are not subject to poison. So Eric comes back, and we're all like, right, let's do this thing. And again, we Metal Gear Solid our way across Europe to the Bosphorus and into Turkey, and well, what is now Turkey, and we find the doorway to hell. And again, he's great about this because he loves that we're getting into the spirit of this adventure. And the spirit of this adventure is very much all about, we're not going out there to kill everything in our way. We're going out there to bring Santa back, bring generosity, bring that heightened generosity back to the human race and to the world in general, and also to bring spring. Otherwise there's going to be a year without spring or summer. This is not a good thing. So we get there and we're all looking at each other, and it's like, okay, we need to do this. And one of them suddenly goes, hang on, the ferryman. We need something to pay the ferryman with. And then we had to do literally the one bad thing we did in the entire adventure. I mean, bad to humans. We may have mugged a passerby to get coins. We're like, because elves don't carry money. Elves don't even have a concept of money beyond understanding that humans do. So Eric is like, what are you going to do? And one of the things that he had gone out of his way with when he did this, he made a little pack for us. And we got the pack the day before the actual session so that we could read it and understand the system and understand what he was doing and understand the characters. And one of the things that he had said was that basically one of the ways that the high elves weren't diminished by reduction in belief in them, because the high elves, while they are a physical species, they're also a species that has a connection to the, I suppose, the spirit realm, for the lack of a better word, the realm of belief. And in Ireland, their numbers they're being diminished, not in numbers but in stature and in strength, as the belief structure in Ireland starts to shift towards a different form of paganism. In this universe, Christianity does exist, but it's a tiny subculture and a tiny cult that's never really achieved any lasting stature for various reasons. And there are actually historical reasons based on the concept of what if Constantine the Great hadn't taken Christianity as a state religion, for a start. Mostly because he knows damn well that gods, plural, actually exist. And so you have this gradual shifting in different nations to slightly different forms of belief. For example, in Ireland, the more cruel ancient forms of paganism, where human sacrifice wasn't uncommon, where animal sacrifice and blood sacrifice is common, where, you know, the cruelty side of paganism is starting to drift away as the culture becomes more advanced and farming methods become more efficient, and we start to understand not just the influence of the gods on the world and the seasons, but also the influence of science on the world and the seasons. It's a world where science and belief literally exist side by side, and they don't just cancel each other out, they actually augment or diminish each other as things flow and change. So we have this pack, and in it he tells us that the high elves and the snow elves don't really have a concept of money. They don't really have a concept of treasure beyond that, the fact that sometimes it's useful to have it. So Eric's like, what are you going to do? And the snow elves, both of us, went, well, why don't we try and find some gold ore somewhere, and we'll pray and turn it into coins that we can give to the ferryman. And we ask Eric how long that would take. Well, finding the gold ore isn't a problem. After all, that region of the world is the source of the myth of the Golden Fleece. Gold is not uncommon in that part of the world. Well, it's not uncommon. No, it's not that it's not uncommon, but it's that it is an area that is known, was in ancient times known for as a source of gold. The Golden Fleece, by the way, being the fleece being used as matting on a kind of trough system that allowed the gold to get trapped in the sheep fleece, and then you could wash the fleece out and capture the gold afterwards. Think of it, if you ever watched an episode of Gold Rush, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But it's a pretty well recognized theory, and it's a pretty well accepted theory at this point. So in this region, he turns to us and says, well, to find the gold will take you several weeks, at least. And you will have to be in contact with humans, and that's going to have problems of its own kind. And we're like, okay, and to turn it into coins, well, he said, if you're actually just to hire someone or use equipment, it'll take you a couple of days. If you commune, it's going to take you, he said something like, I think it was like 5d10 days of communion, of this praying to create these coins. And the three high elf players just looked at each other and went, we ain't doing that shit. So one of them took the hit, knowing full well that if they stole, that Santa would, even after being rescued, cast them out, and they would be diminished, and they would basically fade until they were literally little folk, essentially fairies without the wings. So one of the characters, I can't remember the name of the player, and that's really awful. What was his name? Oh, it'll come back to me probably tonight when I'm asleep. Anyway, he took the hit. And he went out and he moved quickly, because elves are able to move very quickly in this world. And he finds a traveller and he appears before the traveller. And the traveller is quite a wealthy merchant. He didn't exactly mug him, but he used the shock of this elf coming into existence, like bang, no elf, elf, to convince him to part with 5 gold coins. Now, this particular merchant had, maybe, as Eric said, he has about 7 gold coins, and that is his profit for the entire year. So we get these 5 gold coins, and the high elf promises to return the coins to him with 1 extra coin on our return from Tartarus. Or, not from Tartarus, from Hades. And yeah, so we move on. So it's not exactly a mugging as such, but it was definitely a little bit shady. And this elf is now going to be cast out and knows it, but still is going on this mission. Santa must be returned. So we pass through the gates of hell. And while we are not killed by the poison, our characters are affected by it. So we all lose constitution points. Now, elves have, in most role-playing systems, elves have relatively low constitution as far as I can remember. I think they have like a 3-point hit to constitution. I could be wrong, because it's a long time since I played AD&D or anything other than bastardized systems of bastardized GURPS and D20 systems. But in this world, the snow elves had tiny constitutions, just like they had tiny strength. Their constitution was like 3 or 4. It was pathetic. The high elves, I think they were between 8 and 11. But we all took a 1/3 hit to our constitution. All of us. So instantly our constitution checks get a lot harder. Instantly our health pool drops. The snow elves drop from, I think it was like 4. I think they each had about 4 health points to about 2. And the high elves had, I think, about 6 or 7 hit points each, which was kind of ridiculous at that point, because we were going literally into the realm of death. And bad things were about to happen. So we pass through the portal, the doorway, we get hit hard, we're all screwed, we're all looking at each other going, we are so fucking boned. And we were so fucking boned. Because we got onto the boat, and the ferryman put his clawed hand out, and we gave him the gold, and he signalled to us to sit, and we sat, and the ferryman turns around, and I have to admit, we all started singing Don't Pay the Ferryman, while Eric was describing what was happening. We actually all started singing Don't Pay the Ferryman. At least the chorus to it. And yeah, we all might have been quite drunk at this stage. Actually, we were all very drunk at this stage. And we cross over, and he's describing the oily water with the souls of those who were never given a decent burial or were never honoured in death, kind of clawing at the side of the boat because they've been thrown, because they were not given a coin in their grave. They had nothing to pay the ferryman with, so they tried to swim to the afterlife and of course couldn't. And he describes these rotten, oily arms and hands reaching for the ferry and trying to claw their way onto it, but never being able to gain purchase. And he describes how the wailing, and how we almost can't hear ourselves over the wailing, and the pained cries, and the sobbing, and the crying, and through it all, the ferryman is there with his hood, and you can never see his face, you never see his body. All you see is this clawed, skeletal, but in some way saurian hand that reached out for the coins, and it was beautifully described. It was so well done. And he's describing this, and we're just sitting there, we're just enraptured by what he's talking about, because I had only started role-playing earlier that year, and most of the rest of them I think had played for maybe 2 years at most. It was So it was really early on in our gaming careers, and it was different, and we hadn't come across it before. We'd mostly come across games where you fought your way to the finish, and this was very not that. Anyway, I digress. So we get across the ferry and we climb off, and the ferryman turns around without a word said, without a sound, and soundlessly the ferry heads back across to wait for the next people to need the ferryman. And we're all looking at each other going, okay, that wasn't too bad. It was horrible, but it wasn't too bad. What do we do next? So we're looking around and we can see the bank of the River Styx moving in both directions, and this huge, we're basically in an enormous cave, and the cave is so large you cannot see the entrance to the exit to the mortal realm. You just can't see it, and it's so big you can't see the end in one direction or the other. But from where the ferry lets you off, there's a vast, huge gate. This gate is so big that you could pass a cruise liner. The biggest cruise liner ever built could pass through it with space all around it. It's so big that it's like half a kilometer or 3/4 of a kilometer across and 2 kilometers high, and it's literally built from bones. So you have like this cliff face essentially in the cave, and the whole doorway, the archway of this huge gate, this huge gateway, it's made from bones, huge bones, small bones, skulls so large they're impossible to comprehend, and skulls so small that they must belong to creatures that were much smaller even than humans. We're looking at it and we can recognize high elf bones and skulls, and low elf and snow elves and dwarfs, and if it's died in history, there's an example of it in this gateway. It's really intimidating, and we're quite aware that it's the only way to go, because we can go in either direction as far as we want, but we're not going to get to the end of the river. The River Styx is eternal. It goes on forever. So we're looking at each other and it's like, well, fuck. Guess what we're going to do now is go through that gate. And we tried. Because the moment we approach that gate, who appears but Cerberus, the 3-headed hound and guardian of the underworld. And that was where the first session of this 3-session adventure ended. And that is where today's episode ends. I'll continue the story in the next episode, and the following episode will be the third part. But suffice to say, it had started great. It had been it made sense, and it was really good fun. But the craziness only starts right now. Well, next time. Anyway, this is going out on Christmas Day. I hope you're having a great Christmas. I doubt anyone's going to watch this on Christmas Day, but if you do, thank you for watching. I will be back again next week with probably more of this. I think I might actually continue this for the next 3 weeks, and then we'll move on to something else for a while. But I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. It helps my channel to grow massively. As I said, have a great Christmas. I hope you're having a really great day. I hope you got everything you wanted. So bye for now. Be good. Bye.